Welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, Republicans attack Biden's new border policy.
Meanwhile, tensions rise over the latest ceasefire deal in Gaza.
And Dr. Anthony Fauci testifies before Congress. Well, President Biden is taking new action to tackle the border crisis. Today, he's signing an executive order that would temporarily close the border following 2,500 illegal crossings a day. The border would then reopen once crossings fall below 1,500. Republicans have been urging Biden to take action on the border for some time now. House Speaker Mike Johnson says Biden's new executive order was done primarily with the election in mind.
It's too little, too late. Now he's trying to desperately show the American people somehow that he wants to address the issue that he himself created. We documented 64 specific executive actions that President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas at DHS took over the course of the last 3.5 years, beginning on the first day that President Biden took office to open the border wide. They did it intentionally, and it has had catastrophic effects upon our country that we'll be living with for decades to come. And now he wants to issue some sort of executive order, I guess, to show that, oh, no, he really does care about the issue. The only reason he's doing that is because the polls say that it's the biggest issue in America.
At the same time, that's also a sentiment shared by Texas Senator Ted Cruz.
You know what? I'm going to predict in the next 5 months, we're actually going to see the border numbers go down a little bit. Now, don't be deceived by that. It's just like the gasoline prices going down a little bit. They're doing this right before the election. They're doing it so the useful idiots in the corporate media will say, gosh, Biden solved the problem. Nothing else to worry about here. It is entirely fake.
Biden's actions largely mirror the Senate's bipartisan border bill that was previously struck down by Republicans, who claimed it would enshrine many of the current problems at the border into law.
Meanwhile, New York City has had enough of illegal immigrants. The New York City Council wants to repeal its sanctuary city law. The bipartisan bill was introduced by council members Robert Holden and Joe Borelli. Holden said that the sanctuary city laws put all New Yorkers, both immigrants and longtime residents, in danger. He added that New York City does not need to import criminals. The New York Post says that under current laws, police can only work with the government if the immigrants are suspected terrorists or if they pose a significant threat to the public. According to Holden, this led to the death of college student Laken Riley. The NYPD couldn't turn her alleged murderer over to the federal government, so they let him go instead. The new bill would reverse these rules. While the new legislation may receive criticism from more hard-left Democrats in the council, Mayor Eric Adams plans to review the proposal.
And the White House, meanwhile, is threatening to veto a military spending bill over Republican-backed measures restricting abortions and transgender surgeries. The House Appropriations Committee advanced a bill last month funding military construction and the Department of Veterans Affairs. And as part of that bill, Republicans are looking to limit VA abortion access to life-threatening emergencies and to cases of rape and incest only. They also want to bar funding for transgender treatments and ban the VA from flying non-government flags, such as the pride flag, as well. The White House released a statement accusing Republicans of playing partisan games with military funds. A full House vote is expected later this week.
And on a lighter note, former President Trump now has a TikTok account and is growing rapidly. As of this report, Trump has amassed almost 5 million followers in just 2 days. He has one introduction video right now featuring him alongside UFC CEO Dana White. Take a look.
The president is now on TikTok. It's my honor.
The video currently has 78 million views and about 5 million likes. Most of the comments Trump received were also overwhelmingly positive. This means Trump's new TikTok account towers over the Biden-Harris account. The duo launched their account in February, which only has about 350,000 followers. The comments on their posts are also overwhelmingly negative. As Trump tries to win the favor of younger voters, he is also trying to blame Biden for wanting to ban TikTok, despite Trump's administration doing the same during during his term.
A little bit of a flip-flop for the Trump administration there and for Donald Trump himself. Meanwhile, Representative Maxine Waters is calling on the DOJ to investigate Trump supporters as potential domestic terrorists. This week, the California Democrat claimed MAGA Republicans are planning a civil war following Trump's conviction in New York. Take a look.
I am going to spend some time with the criminal justice system, with the justice system, asking them, tell us what's going on with the domestic terrorists. Are they preparing a civil war against us? Should we be concerned about our safety? What is he doing with this divisive language? It is dangerous, and we're going to have to make sure that we understand that we're not at risk with this man talking in the way that he's doing.
Trump recently shared a meme on his Truth Social suggesting it's time for a revolution against the so-called communist Americans. Meanwhile, Waters herself, she's known for making inflammatory comments. Also, back in 2018, she called for public heckling of Trump officials.
Let's stay the course. Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
She also called for protesters to get more confrontational, in her own words, following the death of George Floyd.
Voters in 5 states and in Washington, D.C. head to the polls today. They will settle statewide and federal positions ahead of November. Notably, Montana voters will pick between 2 Republican candidates in a bid to flip Democrat Senator Jon Tester's seat red. Former Navy SEAL Tim Sheehy is the GOP favorite, but he must first defeat 2 other challengers. Congressman Matt Rosendale spent 1 week campaigning for that slot before dropping out. In Iowa, 2 incumbent GOP House reps must defend themselves from hard right challengers. In New Jersey, Democrat voters must pick between 3 possibilities to unseat Senator Bob Menendez, who faces federal bribery charges. Guam and the Virgin Islands will be the last to vote in the primaries this Saturday. And we'll get into more international news when we come back from this break.
Did you know that you don't ever have to leave financial issues behind? You can always watch the show by going to financialissues.org/live, or you can play any past episode in podcast form from financialissues.org or from any of the popular podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Tune into Financial Issues with Shanna Burt live 9 a.m. Eastern Time weekdays at financialissues.org/live, or listen to the podcast on your favorite podcast platforms.
Tragically, and all too often, a young mother in an unplanned pregnancy is in crisis. You can be there for her by giving a life-changing ultrasound through Preborn. Seeing her baby on ultrasound is a game changer, doubling the chances she will choose life from 40% to 80%. For only $28 a month, less than $1 a day, you can show a mom her baby on ultrasound.
On January 21st, 1824, a baby boy was born in Clarksburg, Virginia. His name was Thomas Jackson, and during the American Civil War, he would become the second most famous general of the Confederate Army after General Robert E. Lee. Most people do not recognize him by his given name, but many do know him by his legendary nickname, Stonewall Jackson. To watch more episodes of A Moment in History, go to FISM.tv.
Through the ministry of Preborn, the Financial Issues family has saved tens of thousands of lives of babies. What an amazing job that God has done through you, the Financial Issues family. Would you join us in saving the lives of babies? What an amazing reunion we will have in glory, meeting all the people that we have saved. Please go to preborn.org, that is preborn.org, or financialissues.org, and click on the Preborn banner.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's continue in the Middle East. Israel says they found 4 more dead hostages in Gaza, including 3 older men who were seen begging for release in an earlier propaganda video, according to ABC News. Only about 80 hostages are still believed to be alive as of now, while 43 are presumed to be dead. This is out of the 250 who were kidnapped on October 7th. This comes amid the contentious ceasefire debate, which Israel says the U.S. has not communicated accurately. Last Friday, Biden called on Israel to accept a plan that the Jewish nation allegedly came up with. But a senior Israeli official said that Biden's comment did not seem logical and that Israel's plans have not changed in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu likewise said during a foreign affairs meeting, quote, the claims that we have agreed to a ceasefire without our conditions being met are incorrect.
And turning our attention for a second to the war in Ukraine, where Russia has conceded that it's far too dangerous to restart operations at the seized Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southeastern Ukraine. The UN's nuclear watchdog said yesterday that Russia will not crank up production at the power plant at this time. The agency says Moscow does want to generate power there in the future, but they do understand the danger of using it in an active combat zone.
The restart of Zaporizhzhia, I think I wouldn't characterize the discussions or the outcome of the discussions in Kaliningrad as a formal agreement. I think it was a technical conversation, but with a coincidence in the sense that in the present circumstances, a restart, gradual or simultaneous or more than one unit would not be advisable.
Last week's meeting with Russian officials came only days after the power plant lost one of its lone off-site power lines. The plant relied on a backup energy source for over 3 hours before the connection was finally restored.
Meanwhile, yesterday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as part of an attempt to build relations between the two countries. Zelensky traveled to the Philippines in a rare visit following a stop in Singapore for an international defense conference. There, he accused China and Russia of undermining his goal of encouraging world leaders to attend an upcoming peace summit in Switzerland. Chinese officials later denied the allegations. The news comes after the White House announced that Vice President Kamala Harris will travel to the Lucerne, peace summit instead of President Biden. Zelensky had previously encouraged both President Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping to attend the conference as a show of leadership. But Biden will be in Hollywood during the conference as part of a fundraising event with former President Obama, as well as actors George Clooney and Julia Roberts.
Elsewhere, the Congo is now denying the U.S. access to American citizens who were detained following a failed coup. Yesterday, an embassy spokesman said, quote, we have requested DRC authorities grant consular access to any U.S. citizens who may have been detained and have not received it to date. The Americans detained include Marcel Malenga. He's the son of the main coup instigator, a man by the name of Christian Malenga, as well as Benjamin Zalman Paloun. He's a business associate of Christian Malenga, as well as 21-year-old Tyler Thompson Jr., who used to play football with Marcel. Thompson's family denied any knowledge that their son went to the Congo to participate in any sort of coup. In fact, they believe he was going on a vacation to Africa. Other former teammates said Marcel Malenga also offered them anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 for a security job in the Congo.
Strange indeed. Meanwhile, tensions between South Korea and North Korea are rising. Today, South Korea's Cabinet Council suspended a 2018 agreement with North Korea that was designed to de-escalate some of the tension between the two nations. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said that the 2018 agreement made South Korea weaker and less military ready at a time when North Korea was ramping up its aggression. Since North Korea has recently provoked its neighboring country by sending trash-filled balloons over the border, South Korea has stepped up its offensive with military drills and loudspeaker propaganda broadcasts along the border. The Deputy Defense Policy Minister said that they will do everything to protect the public from North Korean agitators.
And wrapping up before a break here, President Biden is facing yet another challenge heading into the November election as OPEC on Sunday announced it will be extending production cuts into next year, keeping oil prices high through the election season. The move comes amid tepid demand, high interest rates, and rising production from the U.S. Benchmark Brent crude prices have been trading somewhere near $80 per barrel, below what many of OPEC's own member countries need to balance their budgets. Lately, Americans have benefited from lower oil prices, with gas averaging around $3.50 a gallon. And while it is unlikely OPEC's decision will significantly raise costs at the pump, it does mean that prices won't be getting lower anytime soon. Experts believe prices will rise somewhere to around $3.90 a gallon. Okay, and we have plenty more news coming up next. But first, let's go to Seth Udinsky for a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. Well, in our march through history, let's jump back to the 1800s and take a look at one of the most complicated and really fascinating figures in American military history. On January 21st, 1824, a baby boy was born in Clarksburg, Virginia. His name was Thomas Jackson, and during the American Civil War, he would become the second most famous general of the Confederate Army after General Robert E. Lee. Most people do not recognize him by his given name, but many do know him by his legendary nickname, Stonewall Jackson. Orphaned as a young boy, Jackson grew up in Lewis County, Virginia, and enrolled at West Point at the age of 18. He fought in the Mexican-American War and steadily rose up the ranks in the U.S. Army before retiring in 1851. For the next decade, he served as a professor at the Virginia Military Institute. Now, Jackson was a complicated figure. He was deeply devout in his Christian faith and especially confident in the sovereignty of God. He was quiet also, though, and reserved, but utterly resolute on the field of battle. Now, his attitude was somewhat different from General Lee, but their resolve on the battlefield was like-minded, and this made them a potent force together. He was a supreme military commander as well, who chose to deny the pomp and pageantry of most military commanders of the time. He rode a rather small horse for one thing, and he also dressed kind of humbly, and he often lived and spent time in the same quarters as his men. Just like his superior General Lee, Jackson was not fond of slavery, but when Virginia seceded from the Union in 1861, Jackson remained loyal to his home state and enlisted in the Confederate Army. At the First Battle of Bull Run in July of 1861, Jackson led the smaller Confederate forces to a surprising victory over the Union, and it was here that he earned the nickname Stonewall. He became a major general and led the rebels to several important victories in the Shenandoah Valley in 1862. In May of 1863, the Confederates were gaining ground on the Union at Chancellorsville. Jackson returned to headquarters after a successful day when he was caught in friendly fire. He was hit multiple times and was forced to have his left arm amputated. Jackson contracted pneumonia from the wound and died on May 10, 1863. Robert E. Lee mourned the loss of Stonewall Jackson with these immortal words, "He has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right." The Confederates could not overcome Jackson's death, and they surrendered to the Union less than 2 years later. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
But I felt very comfortable in that decision because I found a lot of support. Like everyone here, always made sure keep in contact with me. This is what ultimately changed my decision. knowing that I had all this support that I didn't know I had. Now that he's here and he's 4 months old, like, I look at him and I honestly, like, it just makes me want to cry. Like,
Hey there, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We begin with a bit of a weather update here, where 25 million people in the western U.S. are now under heat alerts in what may be a record-setting heat wave. Arizonans to Pacific Northwesterners face dangerously high triple digits this week as intense heat moves north from drought-stricken Mexico. Meteorologists warn that temperatures aren't going to cool off enough after sunset either to be comfortable, and that increases the risk to pets and people who don't have air conditioning. Meanwhile, if Las Vegas hits 110 degrees tomorrow, that will be the earliest point in the year the city has ever seen temperatures reach that high. The heat waves start tomorrow and could last until Friday. You know, Renata, we were talking to her during a break back there that I cannot even wrap my mind around 111 degrees, and you said, oh, I've seen it before. So what was that actually like?
Yeah.
Hot.
I mean, when you live in California, you're used to hot weather, you know, for the most part. But I do have to say that I think in the desert, it's very hard, and it's just so different to go, you know, experience that like in Vegas. Then, you know, in my area in California, we still got some breaks from those high temperatures.
So you could kind of buckle up.
Yeah,
until the
it
next
didn't
round.
stick around that long, but in the desert, that's just brutal.
Just too much.
All right, well, moving now into some health-related coverage, FISM's Ian Patrick gives us a rundown of some of the big moments regarding Dr. Fauci's testimony before Congress.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, the former director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and one of the lead health officials on the COVID-19 pandemic, defended his actions before Congress yesterday in what was a heated testimony. Fauci sat before the House Oversight Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. Lawmakers, particularly Republicans, grilled Fauci on the many different rules and directives implemented during the pandemic in which he had a role. The hearing touched on everything from the 6-foot distance rule, masking, and vaccine mandates. But perhaps the moment that best represented the heated aspect of this hearing was the entire exchange with Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Here's just a part of that moment.
Mr. Fauci, you also represent the type of science that where you confess that you made up the COVID rules, including 6 feet social distancing and masking of children.
I never said I made anything up.
You admitted that you made it up. You made it up as you went.
I made it up.
So are you saying this is fake news, Mr. Fauci?
I didn't say I made anything up.
You're not doctor. You're Mr. Fauci in my few minutes. No, I don't need your answer. I want to talk about this right here.
Mr. Chairman, objection.
Objection. I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time, Mr. Raskin.
Gentlelady will suspend. Mr. Chairman, of order. Just in terms of the rules of decorum, are we allowed to deny that a doctor is a doctor just because we don't want him to be a doctor?
Yes, because in my time, that man does not deserve to have a license. As a matter of fact, it should be revoked, and he belongs in prison.
Will suspend.
Now, as you could hear, some Democrats, in this instance Representative Jamie Raskin, came to Fauci's defense during that exchange. The hearing also touched on a hotly debated aspect of the pandemic, that being funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China. Fauci denied accusations that he actively suppressed information that the virus had even originated at the Wuhan Institute.
You should have known that Dr. Daszak was more than 2 years late on a required progress report with his grant. Dr. Daszak conducted an experiment that resulted in a novel virus showing excess growth, that Dr. Daszak failed to report that experiment, that Dr. Daszak was protecting the Wuhan lab and not sharing its lab notebooks, and that Dr. Daszak failed to disclose obvious conflicts of interest. So why were you trying to protect Dr. Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance?
I repeat on the record, I have not tried to protect Dr. Daszak, and that's number one. Number two, you said something that's not true, because I did not know about the compliance issues until well after the fact when I was being briefed for going to before a congressional committee.
Fauci was also questioned for his involvement with former senior advisor David Morans, who is currently embroiled in a scandal. Subpoenaed emails showed that Morin's openly bragged about dodging record laws and advising that Fauci, quote, not have anything on the record that could come back to bite, in his own words. Fauci said that Morin's had clearly violated agency policy and that they were nothing more than work associates.
So your senior advisor did not report directly to you?
There are very few people who report directly to me.
Okay, Dr. Morin's testified that he could walk into your office anytime he wanted to. Is that true?
No, that's not true. You don't just walk into the office. The Dr. Morin's issue that was discussed by this committee violates NIH policy, yes.
This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Thanks, Ian. Meanwhile, in some related news, new data shows government scientists got rather comfortable with Big Pharma during the COVID-19 pandemic. According to the New York Post, the NIH and its scientists collected a stunning $710 million in royalties from late 2021 through 2023. Most of that money went to Dr. Anthony Fauci's own National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, raking in a whopping $690 million. It is not clear at this time, however, whether that number includes royalties from the COVID-19 vaccines.
Meanwhile, the war over IVF continues as Democrats introduce a new IVF protection bill. Senate Democrats are going against a Republican initiative that also seeks to protect IVF procedures. Senators Tammy Duckworth, Patty Murray, and Cory Booker introduced the Right to IVF Act in another attempt to sway voters toward liberal reproductive rights. Murray said in a statement, quote, unlike GOP legislation that would not protect IVF and is only a PR tool for Republicans to hide their extremism, our Right to IVF Act would actually protect Americans from attempts to restrict IVF and would allow more people to access these vital services at a lower cost. In contrast, the Republican bill would require the federal government to pay for IVF procedures, and if states refuse that option, their Medicaid funding would be cut. Democrats criticized the bill for incentivizing states to ban IVF and Medicaid at the same time.
And wrapping up today on some good news, the rise of religiously unaffiliated Americans appears to be tapering off. For years now, we've reported on the increasing number of so-called religious nuns, that's N-O-N-E-S, Americans who aren't necessarily atheists, but who don't identify with any religion. But religion data analyst Ryan Burge, he says that could be largely over now, or at the very least won't be rising at the same levels we've seen over the last few decades. Multiple surveys suggest the number of non-religious Americans have remained largely stagnant in recent years. For example, the 2023 Cooperative Election Study showed 36% of Americans claiming to be non-religious. It's a number largely unchanged from 2020. Now compare that to the period between 2008 and 2013, when religious nuns jumped from 21% all the way up to 30%. That's a large jump. Burge says the data suggests the end of nominal religion in the U.S., thereby revealing who the true believers really are. He said the loose topsoil has been scooped off and hauled away, leaving nothing but hard bedrock underneath.
All right, well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And for more updates until our next show, be sure to follow us on social media at FISM News, or by the way, you can also download the FISM app right to your smartphone. Thanks so much, God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow with more news coverage.